the eastern part of the of Maharashtra, which we call as Marathwada. And Marathwada, therefore, became a part of the Bombay state and then in Maharashtra after, of course, 1948. And and when you talk about Maharashtra and you talk about the Samyukta Maharashtra movement in terms of creating a single Marathi-speaking state. And therefore, the regions were mostly the Bombay Presidency, Western Maharashtra, Konkan. The two parts which had some kind of concerns was Marathwada and Vidarbha. And Vidarbha I'll talk about tomorrow, but Marathwada also is concerned because in terms of the areas around Bombay Presidency and Western Maharashtra were already extremely well developed. And there was a concern whether the kind of significance these areas will get. They thought they will get second class if that they will be treated as second-class citizens. And if you look at the Akola Pact, I think 48, that promised the region of Marathwada that they will also get a significant. I mean, they will be given importance. But the bench of the Bombay High Court came, I think, only in the late 70s. The Aurangabad bench of the High Court. Whereas the Nagpur bench was right from the inception of Maharashtra. So these have been some of the concerns, though in Marathwada we don't really have the kind of separatist tendencies as Vidarbha has. Vidarbha, there's been a Nag Vidarbha movement right from the 1960s, 63 onwards. But Marathwada has not really seen that. Marathwada also has benefited because Godavari and Krishna flow through it. And therefore there are a lot of the dams and the river flows through, and it's provides for a lot of irrigation. And in many parts of Marathwada, though it is in the rain shadow area, there's a lot of sugarcane and sugar cooperatives. Sugarcane actually, many people say, should not be grown in such areas because normally itself rain is deficient. And between 2015 and 2019, there was severe drought. And for the first time ever, one had to transport water by tankers, which supplied water to some of the cities and urban areas and those near railway station. But a lot of remote areas suffered a lot because of the drought. And the other problem is in terms of there has been a lot of denudation, which also meant a lot of the dams in Marathwada have silted up. And therefore their carrying capacity has come down. So therefore that is something which we will discuss. But let us start with Aurangabad. When you talk about Aurangabad, I will not really talk about Ajanta and Ellora because that I'm sure somebody else will cover and you possibly know a lot about it. But I want to start definitely with the Daulatabad Fort. And Daulatabad Fort, or what is called Devgiri Fort, is in, because it, again, we all have, I mean, those of us who are interested in forts, we have our favorites. So as I said in my first lecture, the Vijayadurg Fort is possibly my favorite sea fort. And in the land fort, for a long time, it was Golconda and Hyderabad, but for the past few years, it's been Daulatabad. Because if you look at the kind of strategic measures taken inside the fort, and many people said that the fort is impregnable. And most often, other methods were used to break into the fort. And if you go, there are a lot of false ways, there are these dark areas, there are so many things which could stop anybody from reaching the citadel or the Balakilla at the top. So that is, I want to start with that. Of course, there are forts in other parts of Marathwada because some of these forts like Udgir, etc., was often the site of the battle between the Maratha army and the Nizam. once the Maratha Empire became powerful. And the Nizam was defeated, and Udir Fort was seen as one place where it could, we could keep control. But the Daulatabad Fort is, I would invite everybody to spend time with that, because it has a large cannon. There are a lot of other structures, including, which is extremely important. But when you talk about Aurangabad, there is one particular sanctuary called the Gotala Sanctuary, which is very close to Aurangabad. And within the Gotala Sanctuary is are the Pitalkhora Caves, okay, which a lot of people don't visit. And they are very interesting. They're rather remote, but the Gotala Sanctuary itself is has very interesting fauna. I think recently, some years ago, there was a tiger which traversed from Vidarbha, possibly walking more than 2,000 kilometers across places, went to Telangana, and then came into this. But the Gautala Sanctuary is also known for doles, wild dogs. And wild dogs, they're very different from the wild dogs of Africa. And these wild dogs are often called whistling hunters. And they hunt in packs of 7 to 15 or 16. And they say even tigers avoid them because they can just tire out, because they are hunting packs. There have been cases where they've killed a tiger, though a lot of members of the pack died in the process. So the Gautala Sanctuary has a lot of interesting animals, and of course, there's caves inside this. So for that, the Pitalkhora Caves, and also the Aurangabad Caves is also seen as supposed to be one of the oldest in the region. And in Aurangabad itself, if you look at the Jama Masjid, the Jama Masjid is actually, it is fortified quite a bit. And this was masjid built by Malik Ambar. And then, of course, Aurangzeb also fortified it further. That's also important. But even Aurangabad itself, there are parts of Aurangabad which is clearly divided into the Muslim area. I remember in 2010 or 11, I had gone with media students, and we went to visit the Urdu press there. And one of the former students from an earlier batch who had lived all his life in Aurangabad, he said he's never ever ventured in that area. Because it's, again, in terms of it's communally sensitive, and this whole continuing controversy about whether Aurangabad should be renamed as Sambhaji Nagar is always a question. But Aurangabad is, the entire area is called the Aurangabad Division. And Aurangabad, of course, has, because it was at one time seen as a backward region, so also a lot of very interesting industrial development. And after Navi Mumbai, a lot of the projects of CIDCO have been in Aurangabad. Of course, they finished projects in Nasik, but around Aurangabad, they have really worked on more than 2 or 3 areas. So Aurangabad is, again, a very important place for agriculture biotechnology in India. So one of the oldest seed companies is a company called Mahiko. And of course, Mahiko became controversial because they collaborated, or they were distributing seeds of Monsanto. And for sometimes the government even blacklisted because they felt that a lot of the dealings were not very transparent. But in terms of developing a lot of indigenous seeds, including a wheat variety called Pratham 70 something, the Mahiko company has been responsible. So it is, again, interesting in terms of the kind of things. And when we talk about Aurangabad district, of course, one must talk about pattern. So when you talk about pattern, of course, I'm not really talking about the saris, because for me, the interesting part is that it was one of the earliest capital of the Satvahanas, known as Pratishthanapura. And so therefore, its political significance goes back 2,000 years. And also, if you look at pattern, if you see, important Marathi saints like Jnaneshwar, Eknath, they were from Paithan. So, for that place is seen as, extremely holy place. And around Paithan, there are also a lot of, what should we say, Digambar Jain. It's very important for the Digambar Jains. And I think there's an extremely old temple of Munishwar, I think. So one of the saints. That's so for the Jains also it's important. And of course, the Godavari flowing through that also makes it extremely an important thing. So again, if you look at Aurangabad, it's very interesting. The dam near Aurangabad is called Jayakwadi. But the interesting fact is the name is very interesting because originally the Jayakwadi dam was supposed to be built near Jayakwadi village in Bid. And then they decided if they built a dam upstream, they possibly will have a much bigger reservoir. And therefore that the Jayakwadi dam was built. And also some part of the water for the Jayakwadi dams also, a dam comes from Nasik, even from the from Nandur Madmeshwar, even from the other tributaries of the Godavari, but also from Nandur Madmeshwar it comes. And the Jayakwadi dam is seen as an important birding site. Of course, there have been a lot of crises because stagnant water, there are a lot of birds get killed. Or if the I think last year the reservoir water increased so much that it covered a lot of the sites where birds were nesting. So therefore, Jayakwadi Dam is a problem. But there's another small sanctuary called Salim Ali Bird Sanctuary in Aurangabad. And that earlier, that particular place was a small tank was built during the time of Aurangzeb, and it was called the Kizri Talab. And that is seen as an important or emerging bird site, which is important. And of course, the Krishneshwar temple in near Aurangabad is a Jyotirling. And it's possibly it is the last of the Jyotirlings. And many people also say that's also the smallest of the Jyotirlings. And if you look at Marathwada, there is the Aun Nagnath Jyotirling in Hingoli. You also see a lot of the contribution of Ahilyabai Holkar. She repaired and built quite a few temples in Marathwada. So even if you go to Ellora Caves and you go to cave number 16, the Kailash Temple, and you'll see some kind of work which is done. A lot of people question the aesthetic quality of the work which Ahilyabai, because she got it repaired and also did other work which people question whether it should have been done or not. But if you look at the, when I first visited Ellora Caves, my immediate reaction was, why isn't this a part of the Seven Wonders? Because in terms of the sheer, effort in terms of digging through rock and then creating it's one of the world's largest monolithic structures, monolithic temples. And I was reminded because I think similar structures of this kind may be built around the same time. One can find in Ethiopia the Lalibela rock cut temples, rock cut churches, which also in terms of where people have cut through rock. But this again, in terms of the sheer effort and the kind of quality of sculptures all around, I always wondered why this has never been considered as one of the Seven Wonders of this. So therefore, other than, of course, Ajanta, there is a lot of, and even if you're going to Ajanta, I always suggest people, and I also do this with people, that you must go to the viewing site, which is further away from the main entrance of the Ajanta caves. And you can see the horseshoe structure, and from the place where they actually saw that they may be, because a tiger disappeared, and it was from this point that they saw it. And there are steps with which you can walk down. It's a good walk. down to the caves. And I definitely suggest you should spend some time at you can get the extent of the entire cave system of Ajanta. And of course, Kuldabad, for a long time, the grave was just open to the sky. The grave of Aurangzeb. Later on, they have put a kind of a canopy above that, but that's important. And when you look at Aurangabad, a lot of people see Aurangabad and Jalna as almost twin districts. And Jalna and Aurangabad both also have a lot of sugar cooperatives. And Jalna also has, in Maharashtra, it has the largest number of what we call steel rolling mills. Now, steel rolling mills are the iron which you put for most buildings. The steel reinforcement that is basically provided by steel rolling mills. And I think Jalna is one of the biggest, and a surprise, and it's also why is it there? But also because of the concessions which was given, Jalna is something which Jalna also suffers a lot when there's severe drought, more than Aurangabad. So therefore, there is attempts made by a lot of NGOs to see whether they can do some kind of water harvesting systems, which would ensure that it doesn't suffer so much. From Jalna, I would like to move one sec to Parbhani. And in Parbhani, especially, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Mudgaleshwar temple. And today, if you look at the Mudgaleshwar temple, they see it as three temples together. But two of the temples came much later. They built by Ahilya Bai Holkar. But there's one temple which is inside the river. And in monsoon, the entire temple gets inundated. And it's because, and often for a lot of devotees, they also swim to the temple. When there's, of course, summertime, you can also have other ways of going in. So basically, it is a temple which also has dedicated Narasimha. There's also dedication to Ganesh. That I think is, and that temple is, I think it's over 900 years old, or 900 or 1,000 years old. So in terms of ancient temples, the Mugdaleshwar temple is extremely important. And from Parbhani, if you move towards Hingoli, to the east, and Hingoli, I was very fascinated to find that Hingoli used to be, what should we say, the military, it used to be a military base of the Nizam. Because why? Because Hingoli borders with the Vidarbha, what was known as Berar. And a lot of the Berar was taken over by the British, which became a part of central provinces. But Hingoli itself served as an important military base, and therefore there are a lot of structures in Hingoli going back to the Nizam times, maybe about 300 years. And of course, the Aund Nagnath temple, which is a Jyotirling. And the Aund Nagnath temple also has replicas of the 11 other Jyotirlings. It's a fairly large temple complex, a lot of smaller temples, again, which was restored significantly by the efforts of Ahilya Bai Holkar. And from Parbhani, if you go towards Nanded, and one of the things I want to talk about Nanded is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with something called the Maligam Yatra. The Maligam Yatra was a yatra dedicated to the celebration of Khandoba. But also, it used to have one of the largest cattle fairs. Some people say this at one time it was possibly second only to Pushkar. But it's one of the largest cattle fairs, and initially started with in terms of for communities which used to use a lot of donkeys. So from donkeys, it moved to horses, to camels, to elephants. And it's also a place where a lot of scattered communities from various lower castes would come, and they would also deal with a lot of issues which were affecting them. So therefore, there was this some kind of a Jat Adalat which also used to take place to resolve conflict. So over time, the governments have frowned upon such things. That kind of caste and religious significance is reduced. And I think the last few years, the yatra has been extremely small. Otherwise, he used to have camels used to come from Rajasthan. At one time, they also used to train elephants. That is important. So therefore, that and the Maligam Yatra is again about 350, 400 years old in Nanded, which is something which I learned about fairly recently, and which I thought that a lot of people are not familiar with. It's very interesting if somebody could study, because it talks about how a lot of communities were scattered by constant conflict and pushed out, or they were absorbed into different armies, would find it, make it a point once a year to come together to connect and to celebrate and to have this fair. So therefore, that is something. And the Kandova also is known as Mallanna in Telangana, and Mailar in Karnataka. Because this is again, all of this is part of the Nizam's territory, the part of Karnataka, part of Telangana. And therefore it is, culturally very, very significant. And I'm sure it will be, when the yatra takes place, it'll be good. I mean, when things get better, and if the the fair becomes important, it's a very interesting place to visit when the fair happens. Also, if you look at Nanded, in terms of, if you look at Mahur is a small fort, and the people of Mahur, I mean, the warriors of Mahur were allied with the Adirs and then with the Mughals. And from Mahur, there is Pandita Savitribai Deshmukh. And she was supposed to be an extremely ferocious warrior. Okay. And Aurangzeb was supposed to have given her the title of Rai Bagan, or the Royal Tigress. This is, I think, is an interesting thing. Last time I talked about how Taramati was not really, it's not really celebrated much in history. And similarly, when you talk about this region of Marathwada, of course, most of the time she fought along with the Mughal armies. But she was again seen as somebody whose valor was recognized by Aurangzeb himself and given a certain title. And one of the oldest fort in Nanded is a fort called the Kander Fort, which goes back to the 9th century. So it is an extremely, to the Rashtrakuta times, therefore that's an important fort. And of course, Nanded has become famous because Guru Gobind Singh spent about 14 months at Nanded. And there's a Gurudwara there, it's an important place of pilgrimage. So that is, it is, these are important things in Nanded which I thought I'll talk about. If there are any questions before I move on to, from Hingoli, from Nanded, I'll move to Latur. Before that, if there are any questions, any comments?
Sudhakar, there are no questions.
Okay.
As yet.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure how many of you have really visited Latur, but Wilson College, I think, had a close connection with Latur in 1992 when the earthquake took place. And Dr. Shahnaz Nalwala and a few other teachers in Wilson College worked in terms of collecting a lot of material. And one of our teachers, I think from junior college, Jason, actually went with students in a truck to distribute supplies and do relief work. So therefore, that was the connection. But Latur for me is very interesting because it has very interesting caves. One is the Karosa Caves, which goes back to the 6th century. And the Karosa Caves has possibly different, religious and spiritual traditions which are used to carve sculptures. So there are statue. I mean, there is sculpture of Buddha. There's a sculpture of Narasimha. There's sculpture of Shiva. There's also sculpture of Ravan, which is, which for me is again very interesting. And again, there are another set of smaller caves which are called the Hathibed Caves, which is interesting. Of course, these are not very much explored, and I'm not sure how much of detailed studies are available. I'm not familiar with that as yet. But just in terms of the fact that these caves are there, for me was interesting. And there are two forts which are important. One is the Ausa Fort. And the Ausa Fort was one of the forts which was also reinforced by, visited by Malikambar. But the fort is interesting because the fort is built into a depression. So most of the fort is not visible because it's the rest surrounding areas is a plain. And the most of the fort you can't see from a distance because it's in that depression. And the highest point of the fort rises above the plains, and therefore it gives an extremely view of the distance, good view of the distance. But the enemy would never know in terms of that there was a large fort and a defense system which existed. And also I talked about the Udgir Fort, which had in terms of the Maratha presence off and on, at least at the height of their power. And of course, after the decline of the Marathas after 1761, Udgir Fort, the control came back to the Nizam. And so Latur, in terms of, again, has very interesting dargahs, even one dargah which is near the, Karosa Caves itself of Pir Pasha, which, it's possibly something which supported different religious traditions, spiritual traditions. So for that is interesting. And from Latur, I would move to Osmanabad. One of the reason why I want to do Osmanabad is I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the Ther village or Ther, because around Ther, there's one of the largest collection of temples. But Ther was also a very important trading fort. And in one particular document, Peripherals of the Erythraean Sea, it's mentioned as Tagara. Okay. So therefore, from the 4th or 5th century AD, it was an extremely important trading center. Also Ther was the capital of the Silharas. And Ther was also an area where the Satvahanas had significant influence. But I've not really read much of Ther or Tagara in most history books. So when you are talking about Marathwada, I thought these are places where people could visit, okay, which is in Osmanabad district. There's something which is very important. And Osmanabad district is also interesting because it's named after the last Nizam of Hyderabad. Okay. It is the only place in the Hyderabad state where a district was named after a particular Nizam. Of course, if you go to Hyderabad, if you go to Telangana, there are places like Nizamabad, which is the district. Okay. There's a lot of places which are named after the Nizam universities, but this is one particular district which was, named after the last Nizam, and I find it very strange because the last Nizam was somebody who was completely controversial, very controversial for a variety of reasons. Also because of course, he was seen as somebody who released a lot of bonded labor, and he also had, he was also one of the world's richest men. So to have a district in Maharashtra named after that, and always used to wonder, why hasn't that become controversial? Because for people in Marathwada, many of them suffered from the activities of the Razakars around Aurangabad, Osmanabad, etc. But interestingly, there is not much focus on that. Also, there are a series of caves called Darashiv caves, which have Buddhist caves, which also have one or two Jain, maybe later, because primarily they're Buddhist caves. And there are other caves nearby which have a lot of reasonably well done sculptures, which is in Osmanabad. And also, of course, it is there is a Shakti Peeth called the Tulja Bhavani Temple, which is a important Shakti Peeth, which is a temple there. And of course, a very interesting fort is the Naldurg Fort. It is built on a certain interesting basaltic configuration called a knoll, which actually comes out of the fort. And the fort has, and the fort, it's a very interesting, to the Nadir Shah fort, and then it became a part of the Mughal and then the Nizam of Hyderabad. Also, there are, in this place called Kuntalgir, there are Jain temples, because, in Marathwada, as I mentioned here, quite in other places, there's a lot of Jain presence, which again reminds me of the kind, if you go to Tamil Nadu, if you go to places like Madurai and other places, there are a lot of these Jain caves, presence of Jains, which later then disappeared. Similarly, even if you go to Ellora, there's one section of Jain caves. So different parts of Marathwada, there is definitely a lot of imprint of Jain presence, which I find extremely interesting and worth exploring. From there, in terms of we will move to Bede. Before that, I'll wait for 2 minutes. If anybody wants to ask questions or if there are any comments, I will take that up before I move to Bede.
Sudhakar, there are no comments.
Yeah, I'll just wait for a minute if anybody wants to ask, and then I will move on. Yeah.
There is a question again, again on books. Are there any books recommended for the Marathwada region?
Now, books I'm not really worked on. I'll possibly, as I put it together, because I've not seen too many, but I will put it together and send. Okay. In one of the, I think yesterday's lecture, there was the question on in terms of what about the kind of hydraulics and in terms of the water harvesting methods in the arid region, especially in Amarnagar and in Aurangabad and other places. One place which I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with is this place called the Khajana Baoli in Bid. The Khajana Baoli is a very interesting large well which was built, I think, around by the local Jagirdar, I think in 1582. And this Baoli used to, used to basically built at a place where it was able to get water from a lot of from the hills to the underground channels. And at one time, this used to really irrigate more than 1,000 acres. Okay, and it is something which is again, when you're talking about, there is a book by Center for Science and Environment called Dying Wisdom, which looks at the water harvesting system across India, which are being neglected. And one place which there's very little discussed about is this Khajana Baoli. Khajana Baoli is in Bid district. And again, very fascinating. Now, of course, it is in a serious state of disrepair. The water carrying capacity is water channels have been blocked.
Sudhakar, there is a question.
Want to know?
Can you please talk about the political significance of the region? Oh, we can't hear you. Your screen is frozen.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. So
Yeah.
they want to know about the political significance of the region.
I couldn't hear the last part of the question.
The political significance of this region.
Yeah, I'll come to that. So let me just finish with Bid. I will take up the question because I just want to take that. So for me, if you are really interested in knowing, because things like Khajana Baoli is something which is extremely important. And of course, forts like the Darur and Dharmapuri fort in the Bid are again places which are worth visiting. Now, the question in terms of the political significance. When you say a political significance, the region has had three chief ministers of Maharashtra: Shankarrao Chavan, Vilasrao Deshmukh, and Ashok Chavan. And Maharashtra has rarely seen a consummate politician like Vilasrao Deshmukh in terms of the ability, because he was one of the few politicians who understood Maharashtra extensively. And why I'm saying this is because if you look at between 1999 and 2009, for 3 consecutive terms, the Congress NCP came back to power, though their performance was not really very good. And one of the reasons was the ability of Vilasrao Deshmukh to ensure that he was able to network well and choose the right candidates and campaign to make sure that they got elected. When you say political significance, the fact that Shankarrao Chavan, who didn't really have much of a mass base, was made Chief Minister of Maharashtra in 1975, was seen as an attempt to offset the influence of Western Maharashtra and the Maratha lobby of Western Maharashtra, which has been and which was very powerful at that time. So it was Mrs. Indira Gandhi whose attempt to kind of reduce that. When you say political significance, very often we look at Shiv Sena as a Mumbai Thane party. But the first municipal corporation where the Shiv Sena came to power was the Aurangabad Municipal Corporation. It has a lot to do with the fact that in terms of the kind of political desire, I mean, Marathwada was also seen possibly the worst ever anti-caste riots in Maharashtra, okay, which is anti-Dalit riots and violence which took place in Marathwada. So politically, that place, of course, now it was also the place where it has been a significant Shiv Sena stronghold where the BJP is contested. If you look at places like Parbhani, Hingoli, all these places, the Shiv Sena has a lot of hold. But if you look at Bid, Bid was possibly, Bid is the hometown and home district of Gopinath Munde. And Gopinath Munde was possibly one of the most significant mass leaders from the BJP. And he also realized that in terms of one of the strength of the Congress was its connection with the sugar lobby and the Marathas, which gave it so much of influence. And therefore, he set up at least 2 cooperatives in Bid. And of course, his legacy is being contested by his nephew and his daughter. So the politics of it is an important region, and the Congress, of course, the Congress presence in Marathwada has been significantly reduced, because if you look at Latur and if you look at Nanded, in the 2019 elections, Ashok Chavan lost from Nanded. In the 14 elections, the Congress had just 2 seats. One was, I think, Vashim, and the other was Nanded. But that was lost. Of course, a lot of the power has shifted in places Latur and Nanded to the BJP. So when I say political significance as a region, it doesn't really have the same kind of influence as Western Maharashtra has. But the fact that there have been 3 + 1 chief minister, one was for a very short time, is something which is, I think, which talks about the political significance of the place. And as I said, in terms of the mobilization of the OBCs and all of that, especially Marathwada, so the growth of the Shiv Sena and Marathwada is an interesting thing to study. Any other question?
There is only a comment, not any question.
Yeah.
I guess you can continue, Sudhakar.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of understanding Marathwada, in terms of the fact, of course, if you look at Western Maharashtra, I want to just continue a little bit about the political significance. In Western Maharashtra, for a long time, till fairly recently, till I think 2008 or 9, the Marathas were solidly behind the Congress. And that has, of course, changed. But Western Maharashtra is still seen as a NCP Congress stronghold. Marathwada also has a lot of significant and very important Maratha leaders. And of course, they belong to the 3 political parties there, and they do. But as far as the influence in Congress they've had in Shiv Sena and BJP, at the top level, they've not had the same kind of influence. And if you look at in terms of Marathwada, it's important to understand that today a lot of us are, the country has benefited a lot from National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Between 2009 and 2011-12, when the whole world went through recession, the NREG put a lot of money in people's hands, creating effective demand. And the economy remained buoyant. But the model for the NREGA was the Employment Guarantee Scheme, which was started by the government of Maharashtra in the early 1980s. And Marathwada has had a lot of drought, but till, except for recent times, they have not been, there's not been famine. Even now, there's been no famine. And therefore, it has a lot to do with the fact that government intervention has ensured that extreme weather conditions does not really affect, lives and things like that to a much greater extent. So therefore, we've not had any kind of major famines, because, and also the Employment Guarantee Act, which started in Marathwada, is something which became a template for the rest of the country. So therefore, that's something which is important. Second, if you look at MIDC, the first MIDC was inaugurated in Aurangabad, because the MIDC was supposed to help develop backward regions. And if you look around Aurangabad, the kind of industries which have come up and things like that, which is also in terms of, yes, compared to Western Maharashtra, it possibly has suffered neglect, but it has not suffered the kind of neglect which Vidarbha has suffered. And also the, as I said, the presence of a lot of Maratha Sardars, etc., has meant that parties like the Congress and the Shiv Sena have not really helped the other caste groups so much. And of course, Marathwada is also the site of the Namantar agitation, the agitation to rename Marathwada University as Dr. Ambedkar University. Okay, so a lot of the mobilization in terms of the Dalit mobilization, Marathwada has been important. And today, an extremely bright and young Dalit scholar is this person called Suraj Yangde. And Suraj Yangde, I think is working with Howard. So a lot of his work also talks about how even places like, so normally one blames a lot of the neglect of the Dalits and others on British rule. So he says Marathwada was never under the British rule, it was under Nizam of Hyderabad. And even in Nizam of Hyderabad, the Dalits were among the most marginalized. So it is interesting to see that dynamics as well in terms of this. And also, if you look at the 1970s, 60s and 70s, the Dalit Panther movement, which said that there should be an aggressive response. And the Dalit Panther movement kind of fizzled out after the riots in caste riots in Marathwada, because they realized that in terms of they would not have the ability to protect communities which are dispersed over big distances, and therefore they felt the use of aggressive action will not really get the kind of results. So that is something about the political issues in Marathwada. And also the problem with Marathwada for me is that very often a lot of the tourism is only in Aurangabad, because there are a lot of places in and around Aurangabad where tourists go. But a lot of the places I've talked about I think is worth visiting just to see, because if you look at places like Osmanabad especially, could definitely benefit so much from tourism, because it's among the most backward of districts. So therefore, if and there are a lot of things which one can see, especially places like Ter I talked about, or Nanded Fort, and it has its own interesting things which one can see. So therefore, if there is greater interest in terms of exploring Marathwada, because of course there is in I think in Bede there is an interesting sanctuary called the Ramling Sanctuary. Okay, the HD Ramling Sanctuary, because it's near the HD village, which is also again a sanctuary which has quite a big mammals, including the leopard. And many of these sanctuaries, like the Gotala and the Ramling sanctuaries, were actually created by the Maharashtra government to try and protect this. And also, one of the problems in Marathwada is a lot of the wildlife is often outside sanctuaries. So if you look like a Nilgai, Black Buck, Chinkara, these are all, arid region area animals, grasslands. And therefore, when there was severe drought, a lot of them came into, there was a lot of man-animal conflict, because in such a water they would come into, and nourishment, they would come into villages and things like that. So when you talk about Marathwada, other than Aurangabad and Jalna, most other places could do with a lot of development, both in terms of investment and in tourism, which I think is something which we could look at. That's all I have to say on Marathwada. If there's any questions, I will take up. Otherwise, I think we'll finish today's lecture early.
Please unmute yourselves and ask questions.
Those of you are familiar with the history of, I think, Bijapur, of the Adil Shah. I don't know if you're familiar with somebody called Mahmud Gaban. He was seen as somebody who was responsible for libraries and also the development of what's called the Deccani literature. And so he was associated with this Paranda Fort, which is in Osmanabad. And so, as I said, there's a lot of interesting history. And often the Paranda Fort was a site of conflict within Nizam Shah and the Adil Shah for quite some time. So there is history, there is a lot of interesting archaeology we've discovered. And of course, the Godavari is, because there are so many sites around the Godavari, right from Paitan to others, which are also important in the context of religion. Yeah. So if there are no questions, we'll stop here. Yeah.
Any questions?
Okay. Thank you so much. We'll stop.
Most people have found this session very informative, so they've thanked you for it. Any questions? Okay, so I think we can call it a day. We meet tomorrow again. Yeah, there is a question from Paresh Dhere. Wait, I'll just read it out. Is there any potential to develop the Marathwada except few important tourist places like Aurangabad and the 3 Jyotirlings? Sudhakar?
Sorry. There sometimes they say that they want to develop Nanded as a tourist hub, but I've not seen much. Of course, also because the Sikhs are willing to contribute to help make it as more tourist friendly. But in terms of a lot of the places like Mahur and others, which could actually, if people knew about it, I'm sure there are a lot of people who want to visit. I've not seen any real attempt to develop tourism in any place other than Aurangabad. Most of the other sites, which you say, if you look at some of the forts, they're completely, neglected. Sometimes there is not even basic monitoring, and many of them are actually falling apart. And most of these places, you can caves, people can enter, so there's a lot of damage. So the ASI doesn't have enough funds to restore, to do something to make this thing attractive. And also very few people would really think of traveling to any other places, because even if you look at any of the tourist brochures don't mention any of these, most of the places which I've talked about. So which I think is the unfortunate thing. So if somebody can help work on that to kind of popularize it, I think it will do the region a lot of good. Because I have seen places like Osmanabad, they often don't have sufficient places for tourists to stay, because hardly any tourists come. There are few lodges because people who work as medical representatives, others come. But there's no incentive to develop any kind of infrastructure. And that is something which will need to be corrected if one is really concerned. Because often because a lot of places like Western Maharashtra, Raigad, Konkan I talked about, these are places which people know. And even when I was talking yesterday, so many people could possibly relate to a lot of things and possibly know a lot more than I do, because you visited and you've done studies. But when you look at Marathwada in terms of the amount of material available or even interest shown, it's extremely less. And Nanded also, the focus is only on the Gurudwara. But I really wish a lot of people in Maharashtra know about Pandita Savitribai Deshmukh. Because even at a time, because again, in terms of when most of the armies were led by men, and she would lead them into battles. Okay. So therefore, that I think is extremely important. Of course, places like Mugdaleshwar, etc., Mudgaleshwar, etc., there, because of pilgrimage, those places, there are people visiting. But even in terms of the important temples like the Nagnath temple, it's an amazing temple, and I'm surprised that so very few, when I talk about Marathwada, so very few people have heard, have really heard about it. If you're somebody who's religiously inclined and you want to know about Jyotirling, you'll know about it. But any others, but if you look at a temple like Somnath, a lot of people know about it because it's because of history and a lot of things. There is similar history on the Nagnath. Again, there is very little attempt to promote it. That's my concern. Yeah. Yeah. So even other sectors, as I said, now even when the government gives a lot of incentive for to develop other sectors, because there are a lot of concessions, tax breaks and all, but except these two areas, that's why if you go to Osmanabad, Parbhani, Hingoli, you'll find that there is absolutely no real development. Infrastructure is poor. And it could be, of course, a lot of Marathwada is not on any main, railway grid. There is some connection with the, so it's like if you look at Nagpur and other places, they are on the main grids. I don't know whether that's a disincentive. But okay, most other sectors are also not developed. Yeah, any other questions?
Any other questions?
I think we can call it a day. Maybe we can. I'll see all of you tomorrow. Yeah.
There is a comment. Yeah.
Can you please read that comment?
Yeah, it's in one survey, Marathwada was found as a most socially backward region.
Yeah, in terms of a lot of parameters, even in terms of education, and a lot of that in terms of the kind of exposure, there's not been much progress. And there are pockets like where the sugar cooperatives, so a few are benefiting. If you see a place like Beed, Beed is seen as a place which supplies the maximum amount of people to cut sugarcane in Western Maharashtra also. A lot of the workers come from Beed. But Beed itself is not really developed to be able to employ people in various sectors. So therefore, that's the unfortunate part. Because whether in terms, even if you look at the kind of engineering and other colleges which are there in Western Maharashtra. At one time, of course, Latur was very famous for what is called the Latur model for excellence in HSC. But beyond that, in terms of, there's not really been much serious attempt to develop the area. Because one bureaucrat, who was a former student, blames, he says, a lot of the leaders of Marathwada are possibly responsible because they've not had vision to develop the region. He said, if you have three chief ministers, and he says, if you look at one chief minister like Antule, the amount of investment he got to Raigad district, and he was chief minister for a very short period. Or if you look at other politicians in Western Maharashtra, if you look at the kind of development which has taken place in Pune region, it's remarkable. I mean, if you look at what is that, Pimpri Chinchwad, for a municipal corporation of its size, is one of the richest in the country. So if you look at the kind of development which has taken place in Pune district or other places, the politicians and even there are major politicians who allied with the sugar cooperative movement in Marathwada, but they've not really done much for the state. I think it's a failure of leadership. It's a failure at multiple levels.
Since there are no more questions, I think we'll wind up today and we meet again tomorrow for the last session on maps.
Yeah, I think
Thank you,
we'll do that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.